So it's Super Bowl Sunday, so it's nice and quiet here at the underground. I wanted to show you why the Big Three is it's a marketing gimmick. You don't need it. So this is my personal setup. Like on some Chevys too, this is a Ford. They put the positive right next to the chassis, which is the dumbest thing in the world, but that's what they did. Anyways, the Big Three, and sometimes they say the Big Four. It's just a catchy name because of the Big Three in the auto industry, which of course is Dodge, Chevy, or GM and Ford, whatever. All the same, it's kind of dumb. So the Big Three is a replacement of the ground to chassis. In this case, this one is just an 8 gauge. Where's it at? This is 8 gauge. This is some Lightning audio wire that I got. It was on sale. I had to go over to the west side and it was like a pallet for like $100. It was fucking great. But the one that comes from the factory is like 10 gauge and it's real copper. And so the reason why it's a waste is because you have to think about how much current you're pulling. Okay. So if let's say you're going to pull 200 amps, which is quite a bit, will that wire from the chassis to here handle 200 amps? Yes, it will, even if it's only 10 gauge, because it's pure copper, which is really great, but it's also only that long. It's a foot long. So that's fine. That's plenty. So you don't need to upgrade to 0 gauge or whatever the fuck you're trying to do. You're an idiot. Now, if you have an older vehicle like this is a 1990, and this one actually goes, I think, to the starter chassis, which is connected to the rest of the motor. If you actually change those wires on an older car, yeah, your car will start up a lot better. Mostly because the connections are bad and old. And some people have said, oh, when I've done the Big Three, my audio system's louder. That's because your connections were bad in the first place, you dummy. So the wire is not magic. The wire is too short to make a difference. Okay, and so that's the other thing. And then the other one is the wire that goes from the positive to the alternator. And what's funny is actually, if you're going to do the chassis ground is actually best on like this bolt right here that goes to the alternator. Because the alternator is the secondary source, not the primary source. The primary source is the battery. The battery is the primary source for voltage. And this is your reference right there, the negative, not the chassis of the truck. The chassis of the truck doesn't fucking know anything. The battery does though. And the only way that makes the chassis live, or, a ground, which is a bad word for that because it's not a ground, it's a negative. But anyways, we'll say chassis common or whatever, is the battery. That's the only thing that makes it live or work or do anything. So, and then when it's tied to the alternator, that of course does that too. So the other mistake people make is they'll tie this one here, the chassis, to the alternator as well. And that creates a ground loop, which is not bueno. And the reason why that's not bueno is it's called a impedance mismatch. It's because there's slight differences in between each wire, and it ends up creating differences in the wires, and then it creates a mismatch, and then it creates noise. So you don't want to do that. But if you just stick with 8 gauge or even 10 gauge copper to the chassis, that's fine. And then go to your block, the engine block, that's fine. It doesn't need to be 4 gauge or anything like that. And then the third wire, which goes from your positive to your alternator, that should only be rated, and it should be fused for what the alternator puts out. Now, if your alternator is like most, which is only good for about 70 amps, maybe 100 amps, then you only need 8 gauge. Again, you're only going 3, maybe 4 feet, and you wanted to fuse that. A lot of times from the factory, it's a fused link, but you don't see the fuse because it's heat shrinked over. So if you're going to replace that, then make sure that you put a fuse in there. You can put the fuse right in the middle, because the idea of a fuse is that you want it to pop. You don't want either side of the wire to get hot. That's one of the reasons why some people get fires when they run a secondary battery, because you're supposed to fuse here within 12 inches, about like a 250 amp fuse, and then within 12 inches of the back battery, right? So that way, like say the back battery shorts, then the wire's got to get hot all the way here before this fuse pops. And you don't want a super hot wire in your vehicle because that's how you get a fire. So you want to fuse both ends of that. That's just for safety circumstances. And so the same thing if the alternator for some reason shorts, you don't want it to take out the battery. And so that you want that fuse to pop in between. That's it. That's the big three. And it's a fucking waste of time. It's a waste of money. And that's why I recommend to a lot of people, you don't need it. But, you know, there's an old saying in car audio, and it was usually by the PPI guys, that if you make it, they will buy it. And sure enough, if they made it, people wanted to buy it, and now they collect it and all that kind of stuff. So happy Super Bowl. Save your money. Do your research. Smarten the fuck up, everybody. Talk to you later.